All right, let's talk about variolation. And the reason variolation is important is that it's extremely helpful frequently to go back and look at history and see that the lessons which history might teach us. So history doesn't always repeat itself, but it certainly echoes. So this is not the first pandemic that we had. There is Justinian's plague. There's the Spanish flu. Um, and nonetheless, some things remain the same. Yeah, some things change. So probably one of the deadliest diseases that was prevalent up until recently, which was recently eradicated by the World Health Organization, which is something they should get credit for, is actually smallpox. So smallpox is a virus, and it wiped out a significant population of indigenous people, Native Americans, Hawaiians, and such like that. This was sort of well described in that book, Guns, Germs, and Steel. So smallpox, depending upon the type of pox you have, could have a mortality rate of 40%. So let that sink in for a while, right? 40%, right, of people that got smallpox could have died, right? Take a little bit of air on that. You can argue one way or the other. I mean, let's say it's as low as like 20%. Well, for crying out loud, right? I mean, that's still pretty virulent, pretty nasty thing. So smallpox was a respiratory droplet, and you would inhale it. And there was 3 different types of smallpox you could get, but ultimately they were all pretty bad. And you would get pox all over your entire body. And if you want to see what the pox looks like, you can look at it. There's great pictures on there. You can go to Wikipedia, which just is an outstanding resource, and look at pictures of smallpox and read about smallpox. The really most amazing thing about smallpox was how quickly it spread and how virulent it spread and the percentage of people that died. So the question becomes like, how would you protect yourself against smallpox? Well, as early as 1600s in certain parts of the East, they got the idea somehow, and the records are sort of spotty on it, that if you had a small amount of smallpox, just a little bit, like you control the amount of viral particles you were exposed to, that you develop smallpox, but it wouldn't be as bad. So it's a respiratory virus. So think of it in terms of, I don't know, if you put a small little bunch of snuff, right, in your finger, there we go, like that, the amount of smallpox you get is pretty minimal. Right. On the other hand, if you were to like put a line of it, like a huge bunch of smallpox, right, and do the Scarface thing with it and inhale it, that would be a huge, tremendous amount of smallpox, and you're more likely to die. So the question became, what is the best way to get enough smallpox inside you such that you develop some sort of protective immunity, but you don't die, which no one really wants to do. And they came up with a process called variolation. Variolation refers to giving an immunization or an inoculum of smallpox. It's very specific to smallpox, as compared to a vaccination, which is a historical term in which smallpox and cowpox were used to create a vaccine. And we can talk about that later, but let's go back to variolation. So I want you to imagine this virus, which was a plague and a horrible disease. They could go in and knock out 30 to 40% of the population, and you died horribly, right? You looked like some sort of weird pox-filled, person, dying in the worst possible way. And even if you did survive, you were frequently scarred for life. And I don't mean just sort of emotionally scarred, you were. But the fact was that you would have scars and pox on your face, which is why frequently during that period of time is just that people wore heavy makeup to hide the scars around their face when they got smallpox. So if we go back to this whole idea of variolation, we want to get the smallest amount of pox possible. There's different ways to do it. One of them, which was actually pretty ingenious because it could last a long, long time, was to take part of the pox, and which is little sort of pustules in the skin, and you would let it dry out until it became a powder, right? You sort of grind it down to a powder, and then you would inhale it up your nose. Now, that method has advantages and disadvantages. One of the advantages is that since it's a respiratory virus, right, and they really didn't have an idea of germ theory back then, as a respiratory virus, you would inhale it, and it most closely mimicked the normal pathology of the way that the smallpox would spread. The disadvantage to it was if you got the dose wrong, you could die. Um, Based on some of my readings, approximately 40%, again, 40% mortality rate for smallpox. For a inhaled variolation, it could be anywhere from like, I don't know, like half to 2%, which I mean is certainly fairly significant. I mean, 40% versus 2%, that's a 20-fold, a 20-fold decrease in risk. So nonetheless, 2% is not particularly good. As the idea of variolation spread from east to west, it found its way to England. And there were some physicians over there that became actually remarkably good at it, in that you would develop a resistance to the pox, to smallpox, but you were less likely to die. And in that case, what they did was they would find somebody that actually had smallpox and go looking for them and then dress up in all their protective stuff, and they weren't really quite sure how it spread. There was this theory of miasma, which is a bad smell could make you sick, and so ironically, they would try to prevent themselves from that smell, which would decrease their odds of inhaling it, which is the way smallpox is spread. So you go find somebody with a pox, and you take a small little knife, and you'd take it, and you'd scrape under the pox, and take a little bit of pus out, right? And then you would do it to yourself, because you want to be immunized, and because that's what physicians are supposed to do, is to take risks for their patients. And you would take that and scrape it on your skin. And what would happen would be you would have a small inoculum, right? And it was far away from the lungs. And with that, you would get sick. I mean, no doubt you would get sick, right? It's a virulent disease and people died from it. So, fevers, just feeling miserable, beat up, occasionally get a small amount of little pox on you. But certainly your risk of death was significantly lower compared to somebody that got an uncontrolled inoculation of a smallpox virus that inhaled in their nose. Eventually, there was a group of family physicians over there that actually had that down pat, and you would go to see them as almost like a trade secret, and they actually became quite wealthy. So we go through this process again, and the idea of variolation, again, is that specifically refers to smallpox, and you would go and find somebody with smallpox. You'd take a knife, you'd find their little pustule or pox, you'd scrape some of it, right? And then you would put it in the person you wanted to develop immunity to. It's frequently the physician, because you wanted immunity, but often it would be one of your patients. So you'd have the patient around, you find this person with smallpox, scrape it, and you put it underneath the patient's skin that wanted to be protected against smallpox. And again, that person would get ill, get sick. The risk of death was significantly less than inhaling, and certainly less than if you were going to get smallpox itself. So they would feel ill, their muscles would ache, or they'd have fever. It was just sort of horrible. Could last a week or so, and then they would get better. They would convalesce, and that exposure to that small, non-lethal dose of smallpox would generally convey protective immunity for the rest of their life. So in a way, it was actually rather brilliant of them. So it's very important when you consider what I wanted to accomplish to understand the idea of variolation. Historically, what happened after that is that obviously some people were a little skeptical about taking a deadly disease and putting it under their skin. And so they realized there was a cross-reactivity in regards to the way that the body's immune system reacted between cowpox, which was not really lethal, and smallpox. It was very similar. So they eventually developed a vaccine from cowpox, and the reason it's called a vaccine is that the root of the word talks about cows. So anyway, the whole idea of variolation is wildly important in regards to this idea of how to develop immunity relatively quickly. And we'll also discuss about why variolation may, in a way, actually be better, or let me rephrase that. Variolation would actually would be a reasonable competitor against current methodologies of developing a vaccine. And you could argue that it's reckless. It's not. And it certainly would be something that people that have concerns about vaccinations would probably, given their philosophy of medicine and health, be much more open to. So it's important to understand the idea of variolation. If you don't understand the idea of variolation, then you should go read about it, because you won't understand the rest of this methodology and the philosophy and the physiology behind it unless you understand variolation. So actually, Wikipedia has a great article on, or has a great article on variolation. So have at it. Again, thanks for your time, and appreciate you guys listening in. And I'm going to go have another cup of coffee while I work on the next video and the next lesson. Thank you again.